right?
I know.
Right, like.
But
Hi, there. Hi, good afternoon. Welcome to this very interesting session. Hope you had a good lunch. We have a very illustrious panel, as you can see, sitting to my left. We are going to talk about artificial intelligence, no surprise. And there are a few things that actually stand out for me. This is probably the third or fourth year that we are doing it on the trot at this stage. And I've been coming to Mobile World Congress for more than a decade and a half. And one striking point is that every year there used to be a theme, and the next year it was slightly different, and then different and different. But what is holding out, at least for the last 3, 4 years, is the focus on artificial intelligence and what it can do for the industry and for the customers. It's here to stay. It's become almost a constant. And that's so encouraging that what the steps that the industry took 3, 4, 5 years ago has really caused a lot of disruption in the way things were done earlier and the benefits it's bringing to the way operators behave and perform and influence the market and create the demand and create value. The second point I want to talk about is value, that operators are here. They're just making lives better for everybody. We are, although providing those services, but we are consumers of those services themselves. And since the pandemic, I think the value of telecommunication industry and the quality and the experience, plus the availability, being available all the time, is something that we just start to take for granted. But it's not that easy because operators have to make it work. And to make it work, they have to keep investing better. They sit on tons and tons of data, and that data allows them to not just do things better, create a better quality of experience for their customers. Plus, that data can also be harnessed in so many different ways to create even more value for the customers at large. So today, in this 30-minute session, we will try to go through these points and maybe get some value out of it. And let me just introduce the panel. So on my left, we have Alec Mulonga. He is from MTN Group Strategy, Group Tech. He is the general manager for MENA and Southeast Asia. Then on his left is Chika Ekeji, who is the CEO of MTN-i, which is the data monetization arm of MTN. Plus, he used to be the Group Chief Strategy Officer for MTN globally. And on the extreme left there is Ajay Ravindranathan, who is the Principal Solutions Architect at AWS, helping lots of telcos globally to harness the best that AI has to offer. So let's jump in straight. I have a question to Alec. Alec, the theme of this discussion is from reactive to predictive. What does that mean for you while you are designing networks? And maybe to make it a little easier, do you think that networks have really evolved from reactive to predictive?
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Look, from where we are today, if you look at most of the networks that we operate in the geographies where MTN is at, we haven't quite gone to a stage where we're managing and operating our networks with predictive capabilities. So a lot of the network operation today is still by and large reactive. And that comes from a myriad of reasons, really. Some of them are more structural, and some of them are economics and capital allocation decisions. If I talk about the structural ones, for instance, I think the number one would be the fact that a lot of the operators today are still running legacy systems. And these come with siloed data and alert-based sort of triggers for managing the networks. And they don't have the capability for autonomous closed loops, that AI comes with to enable prediction of events before they even happen. So that's one of the reasons, legacy networks, legacy systems that we are still running in the networks today. The second one, there's still a lot of human-centric troubleshooting, which is based on manual configuration of the systems and devices, and also dashboard monitoring. That's what exists today. Now, these were built for static networks of the past, but when you look at today, we've got multi-dimensional networks with multi-layers and very complex. So what was built for the static networks doesn't really work today because of the complexities of the networks we operate in. So that poses a challenge as well. And then thirdly, I'll talk about infrastructure gaps. We operate in markets where, we even have infrastructure challenges and limitations, including power, including even coverage gaps. That brings about complexity as well in terms of how you manage traffic spikes, how you manage, the flow of data across the networks, another level of complications. And then finally, I talked about the economics and also capital allocation. You have networks today that are still coverage and capacity limited, which means there is a need to put money into some of the basic things, foundational things. Do you put your money into broadband expansion, for instance? Do you put it in capacity augmentation to address the growth in traffic volumes? Or indeed, do you want to put it in automation, which also gives you new value, new revenue streams? So with a limited CapEx envelope, it becomes a balancing act of where do we actually put the money and get the best result out of it. So in a summary, we're still reactive, not because we want to, but because there are structural challenges and there are also economic challenges associated.
But what I'm hearing is that if you have to follow a direction, you would rather be predictive than reactive.
No, absolutely. That's the future.
And what are you doing for that?
So, we at MTN are already looking into that. We're already living that today, at least in some of our bigger markets, Nigeria, South Africa as well. The idea is to build multidimensional predictive models that will help us run the networks, focusing first of all in the segments in the lower layers. If you look at the TM Forum architecture, in the network layer and service layer, there are a number of segments and use cases there that we can leverage AI to give us efficiencies in things like fault management, fault correlation, configuration management, trying to figure out interference matrices and so on. So we're already on this journey. In MTN South Africa, for instance, we recently got certification for TM Forum AN level 4 for IP optimization. So we are living the journey already.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So if we say gave you dashboards, if tomorrow the world says, here are these dashboards with prediction, confidence, and 90% accuracy, would you make the switch?
It's a tough one because of where we come from, obviously. But we have to get there. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when we do get there.
Amazing.
Okay, so because, trust comes from a number of things, right? It comes from accountability of the results that come from the prediction. It comes from actionability of the insights that you get from the process, and also transparency from how you actually get the data. So when all those three come together, the transparency, accountability, and then actionability, then you can see the results. And it's from seeing those results that eventually you build even more trust.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Just moving to data then. So when you take so many decisions, obviously that's based on tons and tons of data, which comes from within the network and also outside, internal and external. But when you are generating that data, are there ideas within the group on using it for something else? So I want to pass that question to Chika. Now you sit on tons of data volumes, and what operational data sets do you think are the most underutilized in your operations?
So if you put on the hat and look at monetization or utility of the data from a range of perspectives, there are different places where there are opportunities, and ultimately the combination of the data sets probably creates even more opportunity. I think location-based geospatial analytics and all the things that can enable that in the network is an area where there's an opportunity to do a lot more with that. There's also quite an opportunity in leveraging the socio-demographic information that we can collect for areas of segmentation and other intelligent analytics around customer subsets and so on, right? So that's another place where I think there's an opportunity to do a lot more with that. And there are, of course, a number of considerations that govern what it is you can and can't do, how you can and can't use it, and so on. So that's important to front load before you begin to attempt to leverage that data for intelligence, right? But between, movement and mobility patterns, demographic information that you can actually use to sort of subsegment, and then behavioral information as well, these things are gems that allow you actually get a lot of value from the insights you have captive.
Okay. And so when you talk about monetization opportunities, of course, you talked about geospatial data, mobility data, demographic data, so would you rather than be sellers or users of that data, or intelligence that comes from it?
Without a doubt, we are certainly not in the business of selling data. And as an industry, I think it behooves us to move away from the mindset around selling data and essentially trading in intelligence and making sure that you can derive insights, analytical insights from that, which are valuable, which you then find a way to deliver to a customer, right? And there are a number of reasons why that's important. For one, the data is an asset of value. And if you sell it in raw form or in any kind of pseudo-processed form, then you essentially hand that opportunity for added value creation to someone else. Perhaps number two, and most importantly, there is governance around what you can and cannot do, how you can and cannot use it. It's important for us to make sure that we operate within those governance guidelines as much as possible, right? And I mean, we have operations in 15 countries or thereabouts on the continent, and the regimes oftentimes may vary. So sensitivity to that is quite important. But ultimately, it's important to think about what's the value, what's the customer problem, what are you trying to actually solve? And that is what you work backwards from. And ultimately, the answer is very seldom for you to simply sell the data. So there may be instances where that is used or historically contexts in which that has been done. But the future of what we are building is really around trading in the analytical insights that can be informed by that data. And that is how you preserve customer privacy, data sovereignty, etc., while ultimately addressing the customer's ultimate problem, right, in a B2B sense.
In the B2B business. So when you say in the B2B business, then you would rather sell those predictive insights, rather help your B2B customers use that data in a way which actually is closer to the business result that they're trying to obtain than just giving them raw data and then they go about using it the way they like. So you have
1000%.
it's almost like having your skin in the game, thinking like the enterprise customer themselves, thinking ahead of them and giving them an insight which probably they would uncover after putting in 6 months or 1 year of work themselves.
So it's a little bit about that. I think it's really starting from a collaborative conversation with the B2B customers in this case, or the government customers or public sector or infrastructure players to understand what the business problem they are looking to solve is. And then you shape that in a way that allows you then assess your data landscape. And in some cases, also a combination of what assets they may have to understand, okay, in order to answer this business question, this is what I need to leverage. And here's the work I do with that in order for it to actually get me to that answer. And ultimately, that is essentially the way we think about it at MTN-i.
Okay. So that's B2B. But then there are so many use cases also in the B2C sector. But I think there's a challenge there that when you talk about B2C, data regulation, governance, security, privacy becomes a huge challenge. So how do you think, there are two elements to the question. One, how do you get past it? How do you keep data still secure and be compliant with the regulatory framework? And the second question is, how can AI really help in doing that?
So I would not draw a distinction from what you have to do as a custodian of data from a leveraging perspective, whether you are B2B or B2C. The rules must be the same. And I think if you have a framework that allows you structure that properly, then it opens the doors to whatever it is you want to do with a little bit more freedom. But we don't see a difference in a B2B versus B2C case. Now, we are primarily in the initial phase of B2B business, but our appreciation for what the regulation, the law, and the customer expectation is significant. And so we do not change the bar from our perspective with regard to how we address that. And there are a number of tools that you have to think about the right application of, right? Everything from starting from, say, sovereignty, where you can even put the data versus not. You have to make sure you're respectful of that. Privacy and access control, security technologies you need to build in, principles of minimization, all the governance housekeeping, right, that many of us know. I think implementing that is important. But also there's a meaningful effort where you sit down with your legal counsel to understand, listen, what does the law say? How do I make sure that what I design as an architecture adheres to those principles? And what are the operating mechanisms I put in place to facilitate essentially operationalization of those principles, right? So that's the effort that we are investing in to make sure that everything we do and take to market is essentially done in line with the regulation and with appreciation for nuance by regime or by location, as it were, right? And with respect to AI and its potential to help support that, the short answer is yes. But not all AI is made the same. You don't point, it's not a one-size-fits-all tool. You don't just, the concept of AI has to be thought about with respect to what you actually want to achieve and how you're going to govern that. But you don't let it run loose. It's not as though it's a panacea. You point to that, a data set and magic comes out of the other end. That's not the way we think about that either. But it is a tool that we will be free to leverage in a way that makes sense for the problem we are trying to solve. And in certain specific cases, it could be useful. If there are use cases where it's important, for example, to think about whether there is a predictive or generative component to the solution that makes sense for the customer, then we consider AI tools that are relevant in that case. But there are a number of other cases there, but it'll be on a specific sort of basis around what it is that you actually want to achieve and how you want to post your information.
So I want to ask a question both to you and to Ajay. So we are talking about data and models and predictive insights and then making them usable. All of this can really be done at scale if it is automated, which means that you have to expose your data, expose your models, you have to build those APIs. So the question is about, should this predictive intelligence be exposed via APIs?
So it'd be interesting to hear some of Ajay's perspective. But again, it's important to understand what you are exposing. And we go back to the conversation we had around what it is that MTN-i would trade or sell, right? If what you are making available is an analytical insight, right? Something that enables a decision, then there are elements of that that make sense to expose via API simply as the access channel for the intelligence. And the way to think about that is, in some cases, in a traditional context, you may simply have a report, or you may have a visualization platform that allows you to see things in a geospatial visual layout, right? But there may be B2B instances where what you need is essentially a yes, no, or perhaps say a credit score or a risk assessment of some kind. That assessment outcome may be something that is deliverable via an API. So yes, you would be able to make that available. But again, for the avoidance of doubt, we are not in the business of selling data. We certainly don't think as an industry that is where we should be, because it is the asset that is a premium commodity, one of the things that we sort of must internalize and protect. Therefore, the application or the sort of exposure of analytical insights via APIs may be acceptable as long as what you are exposing is the result of analysis, okay, that is to enable a business decision of some sort and not the underlying data itself. That you cannot expose to automated rampant analysis by agents that are not under control and discipline.
What's your view, Ajay?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question, isn't it? When we talk about APIs, I'll first start with the fact that we as a cloud provider are an enabler for transformation. And today in telcos, the transformation is from really manual operations into autonomous operations. And that's the outcome that we are all driving towards. In order to achieve that outcome and work backwards from that outcome, we see that APIs are going to be ingrained in many different layers so that you can get away from people staring at dashboards to automation running the operation for you. And so whilst we work backwards from there, keeping in mind all the security controls and the sovereignty controls of data, it's important to make sure that there is a way to expose the insight to the right place at the right time and with the right security control. And that is where technologies like MCP and with agentic AI come into play, where you are now talking about a USB stick for an agent, right? Where you can make it a unified interface for data to be available and insight to be available without actually programming these APIs as well. However, the right guardrails have to be built in, and that is where we provide all of the tools and capabilities so that AI doesn't run wild, like you mentioned earlier, and it is well governed, but it provides the outcome that our customers are looking for.
So Chika said that you can't expose the data underlying. You have to expose only the intelligence, only the analytical insights for a decision. You are saying almost the same thing. But what about if you actually need the data to make insights, you need data for something else, and you say that we have the guardrails, we keep it safe, the telcos should expose the data, and the telcos say, no, we will not expose the data. So do you face that rift, and is there a middle ground there?
Yeah, so I think it depends on what are the layers in which we talk about exposure of data. There are multiple layers involved. Internal customers and internal systems versus external exposure of data. And we got to classify what is being exposed at what layer. And if we want to drive that autonomous nature of operations and intelligence, then you've got to find a way to get the data in the right way, in the right form, and at the right time, and exposed to the right systems with the right governance controls. So a good example is like when you talk about performance data from the network or trace data from the network. There may be personal identifiable information sometimes in these trace data, and it's important to make sure that the right governance controls are placed around that so that they're not exposed externally, right, in terms of PII. So in order to run autonomous operations, we are seeing operators partner with us to obfuscate the information at the right level at source, and then use the insight that comes out of it. And we have got the tool set which comes with SageMaker AI, with Amazon Bedrock, with the right governance controls, and also things like Glue and EMR with Amazon S3 to bring together this ecosystem of layers of data that we call data products. So in the fullness of time, we believe AI will be there in every part of the ecosystem. So AI in the network, AI native network, AI to create data products, and then AI as applications. And at each of these layers, you'll have APIs and MCP-driven interfaces that expose the right data at the right time for the right need.
I think while the architects have done their diligence in designing the security systems for each of those layers, I think what probably we still have to cover in terms of the abyss between the user and the provider of data is that trust, that the governments, the regulatory environment, the operators, the legal councils, they also see everything equally. That if data is required for a certain use case or a certain application, and if it still sits behind the guardrails of the data provider, how do you convince them to make sure that they are happy and safe in sharing that data? Even though if it's not predictive insights, you need the data because not everything will be on the product roadmap or the insights roadmap of the data provider. But if there is value to create by using that data elsewhere, there has to be a mechanism of data transfer between the two.
Yeah.
Amazing. And coming back to the commercial impact, so we spoke about data monetization, which is external predictive insights and use cases. However, we're talking about prediction here. If you were to choose, should optimization, which essentially impacts your own profitability, your own commercial operations, should it come first before monetization externally? That's a question for Alec, yourself, and Chika. So if you had to prioritize, what would come first?
Yeah. Look, I think you have to build sort of the trust and the capabilities internally, make them, give you results in terms of realizing benefits in the form of efficiencies, in the form of productivity. By doing that internally, you optimize the processes, you optimize the way you actually manipulate the data. And then once you've built that kind of capability in-house, then it becomes a lot more easier to go out and monetize it. And Chief can pick it up from there.
So look, I think it's more a sequencing aligned to what Alex says. But if you were to do a top-down analysis, the average telco has a fixed cost base. Optimizing that fixed cost base by 10, 15% has more or less a directionally fixed level of impact. But if you're going to do a business that allows you essentially pursue a value creation strategy that's external facing or that's beyond optimization, you fundamentally have to believe that you have an opportunity that isn't capped at the onset, right? So in sheer, say, dollar terms, if you will, there may be a significant opportunity with monetization beyond optimization. And that it's not necessarily just external to the organization, but in areas of CVM and things that we do within our own customer base, there's opportunity there. So that aggregate opportunity should be meaningfully higher than what optimization will deliver. But that said, in addition to building trust in your own capabilities, quite frankly, sometimes it's important to work through a number of things and learn a little bit about what you have, what you don't have, the quality of what the data is like, what kind of flows you need for what, and then build some knowledge internally or institutionally around how you think about data in the context of particular use cases. That is why, or part of why, it may be disciplined from an approach perspective, particularly for MNOs, right? To start off saying, how can you use this to actually improve your business? And then, how can you build on that to take this externally and bring value to entities outside of your organization? It is a disciplined approach to addressing the issue, but it isn't necessarily a trade-off one versus the other in absolute terms and in perpetuity. I think you should get to.
So it's not a prioritization question. You have to do both, and you need teams to focus on both.
But the sequencing is important, right? And I think that there's value in the learning that comes from that sequence.
Great. So let's talk about some of the cost economics here. So to do all these things at scale and automatically, you have to rely on a lot of compute and storage infrastructure. You have to think about GPUs. Operators are building their own GPU clusters, and hyperscalers are offering their GPU clusters. It's all about the economics, cost per bit. And how are you all thinking about those economics? So maybe the first question to Ajay from AWS. So how should operators think about cloud versus on-prem GPU economics?
Yeah, so we all know at the moment that GPU farms are not the cheapest things to put together. They have a cost to them. But there is value attached to this, and that is what we are there as a cloud provider to provide that value at scale and on demand. And what we believe is that having access to the accelerated compute at the right time for the right need, and then having that shared infrastructure that everybody can benefit from is an amazing sort of capability that we want to provide at scale. However, when you start thinking about use cases and the way operators in regulated industries work, there are use cases where you would need the data to sit on-prem, and you absolutely cannot let that data leave. And in those cases, it does warrant to sort of get the value out of that data using the capabilities of accelerated compute and GPUs, is to have that small footprint of GPU infrastructure that is running on-prem, and that becomes that hybrid platform. So you would imagine large amounts of training running on the cloud versus small amounts of that inference running on-prem, and even some of the training where the data cannot leave at all. So yeah, I think the world will be hybrid in nature for a while, but we believe that the right economics sit in utilizing on-demand GPU compute from the cloud, and then utilizing where required from on-prem.
So to Alec, based on that, he said it's super expensive, don't build yourself. But if AI reduces your CapEx by 10% with predictive analytics, would you still buy GPU or go with the hyperscalers?
I think it goes back to my earlier point around the economics and capital allocation decisions. I think where we are today, it would probably make more sense to go with the hyperscalers.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. And are you able to maybe put down a number? Can you quantify the CapEx savings? What's your vision? What's your vision in terms of the savings you want to generate by being predictive?
Difficult to put a number because it's dependent upon a number of factors, the complexities of the network, the maturity of the network. So really hard to put a number, but suffice to say that there definitely is value in investing into prediction because of the sort of latent power that you get from AI.
Quick fire questions, last minute. To you, Alec, how comfortable are you letting AI make autonomous run decisions?
I think it's not a matter of being comfortable. It's a matter of actually, an imperative going forward.
Okay.
When you bring together the physical world, the human element, and AI, only then do you unlock real value. So it's an imperative as opposed to something that I'm be comfortable.
Cool. And to Chika, which decision would you never automate?
Which decision would I never automate? I don't think there is a decision that I would never automate. I think there are many decisions that I would only automate in the right way and with the right governance. And if the technology is at a stage where it allows that be in place, then I'm welcome to automate everything that would be properly governed. And I think that's important.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. That brings us to the time that we had. I had a fantastic time with the panel here. I hope it was useful for the people sitting in the audience. And we look forward to seeing you all again next year. Thank you.